Hey, my name is Jen and welcome to the Book Refuge. Well, November is over, man, and December is starting in just a couple of days. And so that means it's time for another wrap up. And I am super excited to dive into this with you guys. But before I do, just want to let you know if you are into the booktube community and you're interested in wrap-ups, book reviews, challenges, all that jazz, I put up new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so go ahead and click subscribe to see more. Now let's dive in. This month, guys, I had an amazing reading month, and I was not expecting it because I had a lot going on this month, but somehow I made time for it. I really committed to every day setting aside some time, as well as between listening to books, and I was using my ebook, Kindle, a lot more than normal to get through some e-arcs I've been reading, and it was just a really good month. So I read a total of 15 books. I had 5 5-stars, 4 4-stars, 4 3-stars, 1 2, and 1 1. So that's really exciting as well because everything was rated decently high for me. Like there was only a couple things that were either hard to get through or I just violently didn't like them, which we're about to talk about. The book that I violently didn't like. But so that was fun too. Like I felt like I kept rating everything really high, but I would finish a book and I would be like, this is 5 stars for me. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. That's why I keep looking at it. And I just had to. And I was like, you know what? I don't have to nitpick. There's no rules to this. I can do what I need to do. Without further ado, let us jump in to what I read this month. Starting with the worst one, which I know that this one is going to be controversial. Maybe not, because it's not like this book is a huge book like some of the other ones I read. But I think the people that like it really like it. And the reasons they like it are the exact reasons I hated it. That would be Damsel by Alana K. Arnold. I hated this book so much. So much. One of my reading vlogs when I was reading it about 3 weeks back explains it. But basically this novel is about Amma, and she wakes up when a prince rescues her from a dragon. The cover on this, though, is on point. It is so beautiful. There's a lot of hints in the cover when you look at it. But the way this works is every generation, when a prince is about to become a king, he has to go and fight a dragon and save a damsel and bring her back, and then she becomes his queen, and the cycle starts all over again. And Amma gets rescued, and she has no memory of life before rescuing. And the prince, whose name I totally forgot, is Emery, encourages her that this is normal, you don't remember, but I rescued you, and you're gonna be my queen, and it's gonna be great. I love you. It's gonna be great. So you think it's gonna be a case of insta love, and that she's just gonna go along with this, and then maybe there's some like bigger thing going up, but no. This book is rife with abuse, gaslighting, bestiality. That's right. That doesn't happen very often. And just, but on top of that, because I'm not doing a full review of this here. You can check out my Goodreads below. I will link the review for this because I go into more spoilery detail. But it's just the things that the author was trying to say with it, I don't feel like are conveyed in a healthy way. Obviously, the things that are happening are very unhealthy. Which is fine. Like that's what we use literature to do, is to show unhealthy things, but then it isn't resolved in a healthy way. And I don't think that our heroine makes the right choice at the end. And it's a personal opinion. And that's why this was a 1-star book. I DNF'd it almost. So first I DNF'd it halfway through because I looked ahead because I was like, where is this story going? And I saw a spoiler. And then I was like, this book, and I like threw it. And then the next day I was talking to it with my friend, and I was like, you know, I want to see how it gets to that point, like why that which happens. So the next day I came home and I finished reading it, and no, it wasn't satisfying to me. So whatever. This isn't a book I would choose to read, and I don't suggest it to anyone. So it was a 1 star. because it was exciting in the beginning. So otherwise it'd be 0. So there we go. Ugh, that was awful. Next, my 2-star, which I don't have with me, so I'll put up a picture, was an arc for White Stag by, I'll also put the author's name because I didn't write it down. Sorry. But this was a story about a girl named Janaki who has been with their goblins, but the goblins are set up a little more like elves, is how they would look to me. They would look like an elf, but they're called goblins. And her village was decimated and she was kidnapped by goblins 100 years ago. And she was brutally raped and abused by the goblin who kidnapped her. And then that goblin gives her over to another goblin who becomes her caretaker and friend and eventual love interest. I don't know. But the start off point of this novel is the current Goblin King gets murdered and his stag gets away. And whoever owns the stag is the next king. So then there becomes a chase after this stag. And that's the point, I guess. But Janaki is still human, even though she's been alive for 100 years in the permafrost, I think it's called. Maybe. I don't know. And she is slowly turning into a goblin. And she doesn't like that. And that's the main plot. And I didn't like it. It was a confusing way that the story was told. The magic didn't make any sense. Don't know why you needed to call them goblins and then make them look like elves. Like, it could have just been elves. I don't know. But that's a story. That's their choice. But yeah, and I just didn't like the main character. It was a lot of self-hate, that she hates who she is. And she hates this guy who basically rescued her from the other one who was raping her. Like, he rescued her and she still hates him. She's like, I can't trust him. And I'm like, yes, you can. He saved you. And I got about 40% into this before I DNF'd. So full disclosure, don't know what happens. Didn't care. Again, I thought it was kind of an interesting setup. It didn't trigger me. It was just boring. And I feel like it shouldn't have been boring for how many different magical elements were in it. So DNF that, because it was taking forever. And I was like, time to let it die if it's not working. All right. Next, we will get to my 3-star book. And that was West by Edith Patel. I made a full spoiler review for this, which I will link up above. This will be on my greatest disappointments list. I would have given it less stars, except I was trying to be objective just a little bit about like how good the story was, even though I feel like Edith Patel took my favorite characters and put them through a meat grinder and said, don't they look the same? And she looks like a meatball instead of the beautiful cow that she was before. I know that's a weird analogy, but I mean, my beautiful sacred cow that was Rose was turned into meatballs. I know that's the weirdest analogy you've ever heard, but I'm pretty angry about it. But I did give it 3 stars because if this tale hadn't been about Rose and Charles, who I love, like if this had been about other people, it would have been a really interesting story. But I do not believe that my characters from my favorite book ever, East is my favorite book ever, I don't believe those characters would be these characters in this book. I refuse. I think the author used some really cheap tropes, including, I can't say because it's a spoiler, but go check out my rant review. It's like 15 minutes long and I was angry and feisty. But this was my biggest disappointment this year, because I tried not to have too high expectations, but from the author who brought me my favorite book, I feel like I deserve to have high expectations of her. So this was a 3-star for me. Next was a 3.5 star. This was my fun little romance that I read, because you'll notice most of the books I read were fantasy and I just needed a little fun pick-me-up, and Eloisa James does that for me. Eloisa James and Julia Quinn are my 2 favorite romance authors. So this was just a cute continuing tale of the wild The Wilds of Winlow Castle. The family name is Wild. That's why it's spelled with an E. But it was cute. This is the third one. The characters weren't my favorite. The characters from the second book were my favorite ones. And they're pretty heavily featured in this book. So that's why I still liked it. But the main heroine, she was annoying to me. So it was only 3.5. These are usually like 5-star books for me. But it's okay. It did what it needed to do, which was take my mind off of some of the other things. Even though I read really good books, it was just I needed a break from fantasy because everything I read was like pretty high fantasy or something like that. It was another disappointment for me, and that was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. Laini Taylor, I read her Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy pretty much near the beginning of my booktube journey back in like May. And I really loved that series, although it went downhill strongly for me with each book. The first book I thought was so interesting, and like the twist was so good. This book, it ended strong for me. It was great. And you'll see I'm about to put up my December TBR. I am planning to read Muse of Nightmares. This book just took maybe 300 pages before I was interested, and in a 530 page book, that's too damn long. Okay, everyone who loves this, I feel like they love it for the prose and for Laszlo, and I did like Laszlo, but he was still boring to me in the beginning. There was a lot of fun quotes. I mean, I think I highlighted a few things. I made a lot of notes on this because I did a buddy read with Murphy's Patreons for this. Or no, just with Murphy for this. And she was harsher on it than I was. If we weren't doing a buddy read, I wouldn't have made it to the good part of this book. Because I would have DNF'd it at like 100 pages. Because that's my rule. That's my personal rule. If you don't have me interested within 100 pages, we're not going to be friends. And I wasn't, but because I was reading with Murphy, I was like, keep pushing. And I did, and I'm happy I did, because the last 80 pages were great. But out of 511 pages, only 80 pages were keeping me into your book. You didn't do a good job with pacing, Laini. I'm sorry you didn't. Not for me, because and then once it got to the romance, it was as insta can be. Like, it was instant ramen noodles, insta love, and I wasn't into it. But the twist at the end was, it was good. It was good. I was into it. So like I said, I will give Muse of Nightmares a chance. But I wasn't impressed with this. Throw your hate. I don't care. I was bored. I will not be bored in my fantasy. You didn't do a good job. Then another 3.5 was Romanov, which I'll put up a picture because this is an arc. I will do a more detailed review for this when it's closer to the release date. But this is Nadine Brande's second novel. I had to look how to spell her name. And this is a retelling of Anastasia. And it has some magic thrown into it, is what makes it kind of like a retelling. But it is very faithful up until a certain point. So it is chronicling the last days of Romanovs from the time that they are imprisoned by the Bolsheviks until the time of their death. And it says on the cover of the book, which is really pretty, you see it's beside my face here, it says, "Even royal blood can't stop bullets." And yeah, it goes there. It chronicles their last 6 months or so when they're in captivity up until the date of the murder of the family and beyond. So yeah, it was very good. Again, I just did a really detailed, well, not a detailed because it's not spoiler review, but I put on my Goodreads for it, showing 3 things I liked and 3 things I didn't like. And again, I'll make a review closer because I believe that doesn't come out until March or May next year. So I don't want to talk about it too much, but if you love Anastasia and history, I think you'll really like it. As for what the fantasy elements are, they didn't make any sense to me, which is why it's a 3.5. And also it was really kind of boring in the beginning, but there's a purpose for that because, I mean, they're in captivity and they weren't allowed to really do anything. So you're really kind of forced into that of like the mundane, everyday, their lives are ruled by the Bolsheviks and their deaths are ruled by the Bolsheviks, and it's hard. So the boring part of the book, I feel like, is that way for a purpose. But then, you know, I really have to get going. I have so many more books. But anyway, full details on my first one, which I read like the first day of the month, was Notes from My Captivity by Kathy Parks. This book was a 4-star read for me. This is about a girl named Adrienne who she goes with her stepfather. He goes to prove that this wild Siberian family actually lives there, and she goes with to write a paper about how he's crazy, basically. So she's kind of gonna throw some shade at her stepfather, but then her stepfather dies, and everyone who went on the trip dies except for her, and she ends up being held captive by this family. So yeah, it's very interesting, and it's a really cool story. So I don't want to say anything else because it's a pretty small book, and but that's the setup. Is she goes on this trip and ends up in captivity with them, and she ends up with a story to tell, but it's not the one she thought. So this was great. This was a fun contemporary, even though it was kind of dark. Woo! Look at that. This was a fun contemporary, even though it was kind of dark. And you know, I love that really like niche genre of it's become a thing for me, of like contemporaries with people lost in the wilderness is kind of my thing, which is funny. I read Daughter of the Siren Queen, which was the follow-up to Daughter of the Pirate King. This continues to follow Alosa to the Isle of the Sirens. And in this one, she has all the parts of the map, and she brings them back to her father, along with the captives that she got from the last novel. This is by Trisha Levenseller. I loved it. It was a 4.5 for me because it was just so fun. Like, this isn't doing anything revolutionary, but it was fun, and it was what I wanted from it. It upped the stakes from the last one, and the last one I think I gave a 4, so I wanted to give this a 4.5. It was fun. Next was a 4.5 was The Black Witch by Laurie Forrest. I love this book, which is funny because the first like half of it was hard. I was interested because I knew something good would happen, but it was hard because a lot of bad stuff happens to our main character, and you're supposed to not feel bad for her because she's from a privileged family, and all the people being mean to her are like less privileged than her, and so it's supposed to be like they're like getting back at her, and she looks like her grandmother, who is the Black Witch, and she's the one who like ruined these people's lives. So it's like you're supposed to feel for both sets of people, and I didn't, because I love Ellerin, and I was like, why are you guys being so mean to her? She didn't do anything to deserve it, okay? She didn't do anything to deserve it, and it was just driving me crazy. But then things start to come out, and she starts to rise above their prejudice to her, and she rises above being prejudiced back, and she makes this really interesting group of friends. And I love it for some of the great conversations that it's had. This is a really polarizing book, but I feel like when you finish the whole book, like you don't just stop when the segregated people, when the dejected people are being mean to her, because a lot of people get there and they're like, you're making these types of people look like they're evil. And I was like, no. The point is, they're being mean to get justice for what was done to them, which isn't right, but you don't like blame them because they're having horrible things done to them, just awful things. And then what is so cool is that Ellerin realizes that, and she wants to help. She doesn't want to be someone who just has her head in the sand and things handed to her. She wants to right wrongs. And some people want to call that as like white savior syndrome or whatever, but it's like, what else is she supposed to do? Because if she doesn't help them, then she's just feeding into the stereotype, and if she does help them, then she's trying to be the savior. No, she wants to help these people as best she can, and by the end of it, her group of friends is so cool, and there's friends from like all the different races. They're at this school together, and it's amazing. And so I'm reading the second one right now, The Iron Flower. I have to finish some other books, So I'm like holding back because I really want to dive into it. But I loved it. And I love the magic system is starting to flesh out for me. And I just love all the characters. And it makes me so happy. So please give this one a try. It's great. Yeah, I loved it. It was 4. And then my last 4, I'm almost done with this book. I'm doing this for Tome Topple. And I just have like 100 pages left. So I know I'm going to finish it before November is over. And that's The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, which was a lot of people's favorite book this year. I'm taking a lot of notes because I'm doing this as a buddy read for Tome Topple. And this book, I thought... So reading the first 200 pages, I was sure this was going to be a 5-star read. I was on the train with everybody else. I was like, woo woo, I love this story because it has a magical school and has a kick-ass main character and it has fun, kooky teachers. And I love those kind of stories. But then, and like, I know that's the point because it's called The Poppy War. So like, you know, there's going to be war. But I'm just not really into that side of it. So... but it's just not my thing. So I'm giving this a 4, a solid 4, because the first half was so great and I'm still really intrigued with it, but it's just not my jam. It's not my thing. But I love Rin. She's so cool. She's as badass as the baddest asses can be. And so I'm going to give it a 4, but it's not quite my jam. All right. Now let's get into this 5-star stack. We'll go as fast as we can. First off, I have to. I've also made a review for this entire series in a PSA called Read Poldark. And this is the last book in the Poldark series. It's called Bella Poldark. And I love this series so much. I made a whole video about it. This wrapped up 32 years of awesomeness. This book is so good. Please read this series. It's a historical fiction, takes place in Cornwall, and this was the last one. It was about mainly the youngest daughter in the family and just about how life continues, and it's so good. 5 stars. And then what I did is I actually didn't read the first 2 books in this series. I started with the 3rd one and read the 3rd through the 12th book because I watched the first season, which is books 1 and 2. And then I needed to know what happened, so I read book 3. So I started over with Ross Poldark, which is the first book. This is a weird movie tie-in, but, you know, it's Aiden, so it's beautiful. But it was so good. I love starting over, and, like, our characters meet each other for the first time, and it's just so cute. So I listened to this one. So 5 out of 5, of course. Almost done. We're almost there. Another buddy read I did this month was Vicious by V.E. Schwab, and then I read Vengeful right after that because the cliffhanger, though, this was 5 out of 5. Both of these, I can't wait to read more of V.E. Schwab. If you don't know what Vicious is about, go find someone to tell you. No, I'm just kidding. But for real. So this is about Victor and Eli, who are college roommates, and they decide they want to find out how to make EOs, which are called extraordinaries, which are like the superheroes in their world. And so they figure out how to do that, but things go wrong and they become enemies. And it's awesome. So this book and then this book. And she might write a 3rd one. Who knows? There's 5 years between these 2 books. And so, yeah, beware if you get in. It could be forever. Yeah, can't talk about. And then, finally, the last book I read. I can't get the damn sticker off of this one, so whatever. I read Archenemies by Marissa Meyer. Guys. This was awesome. 5 out of 5. This is the story of Nova and Adrian. Nova is an undercover anarchist who is trying to overthrow the renegades. And so she's been undercover as a superhero, and things escalate in this novel. And that's all that I can say. But you should be reading Marissa Meyer. You really should be reading her. So, there we go, guys. That was 15 books, which is the like second most books I've ever read. Like, what's up with that? I've been averaging like 10 or so for the past few months. And then this month I just read all the books. Girl read all the books and it was awesome. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Again, I put up new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So go ahead and subscribe so that you don't miss a single one. Have a great day. Bye.